Hello and welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Lauren. I am a plant-based certified holistic nutritionist, and my specific area of focus is on the connection between diet and disease. I have been studying nutrition for over 15 years, ever since my grandma was first diagnosed with a form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which it kind of doubles as a cancer, but also an autoimmune disease because it is a cancer of the immune system. She since has passed away just this past year in July, so she made it a long time. But my boyfriend also has a form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which is considered kind of the sister cancer to the one that my grandmother had. So for this reason, autoimmune disease is a topic that is close to my heart, and I have spent a lot of time focusing on that, and especially learning about gut health after I learned about the kind of autoimmune gut connection, which is the name of the course that I just completed. So again, I have been studying nutrition for over 15 years, and I have been certified for the last 4. And part of that certification process is that we have to renew every 2 years, and I am due to renew my certification in June. And so one of the courses, which I just completed, was Autoimmune Gut Connection. And so normally I do a vlog channel, and I normally have nutrition chats periodically in my vlogs. But for this one, there's a lot of information to cover. And so I really wanted to come and bring you guys a specifically focused on this topic, full-length video that is not a vlog, but just covers autoimmune disease and gut health. And so without further ado, let's get started. So I will put these slides up on the screen here so that you are able to follow along. But I'm going to jump right in. So one of the earliest indicators of autoimmune disease, or one of the kind of the earliest precursors, I should say, of autoimmune disease is inflammation. And so we are in a country where inflammation is just very prevalent in most people. And that's because inflammation usually comes from one of 2 sources. One is diet, and the other is stress. And I'm going to talk about both of those. But we're going to start with inflammatory foods. And so when our body is in a constant elevated state of inflammation, and it never calms down, never calms down, never calms down, over time, that wears on our immune system, that kind of causes a breakdown. And eventually, if we, develop an autoimmune disease, that's kind of what that leads to. So a lot of times we can look back and look at years and years and years of like excessive stress and a poor diet. And that is oftentimes what brings us to the point of developing that autoimmune disease. So we're going to start with foods. Common inflammatory foods. Dairy is a huge one. And for me personally, I am sensitive to dairy in more ways than one. It's not just, bloating and a gut health issue, but also for me, I am very sensitive to the hormonal imbalance that is created by dairy, because I, first of all, am sensitive to fats, but then also dairy, in addition to being high in fat, is also high in estrogen as well. So it's kind of a double whammy. So dairy is one that I very strongly have to avoid. And then refined grains, things like wheat gluten, which we will talk about in a minute. Sugar, so I'm talking added sugar, refined sugar, not necessarily maple syrup, things like of that nature, agave, some of the natural sources of sugar. Trans fats, which this is specifically found in deep fried foods, especially fast food. If you're going to eat fast food, you're going to get trans fat. It doesn't matter which one of the restaurants you go to, they all are very guilty of this, and it's because of the oils that they use to fry stuff in. And then processed foods. And then red and processed meats are very highly inflammatory to our gut. And then the one that no one is going to like to hear, but is going to keep coming up throughout this presentation, is alcohol. So what can we eat to help lower inflammation? What are some anti-inflammatory foods? So first and foremost, omega-3 fatty acids. And we are not getting this from fish, okay? Because fish, in addition to being high in dietary cholesterol, being high in unhealthy fats, also, it contains a lot of toxins, so it's usually very heavy in mercury. Obviously, this depends on freshwater, saltwater, where it's coming from, but mercury, and then pretty much all fish, no matter what source, even if it's farm raised, contains a lot of PCBs. So we want to avoid that, and we want to stick to plant-based options for omega-3s, and that is primarily going to come from flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, and walnuts. Now, for me personally, I do consume a serving of flaxseed and a serving of chia seed every single day. And then hemp seeds and walnuts are kind of more intermittently in there. So I'll put them on salads and things like that. So I have them frequently, but maybe not daily. Antioxidants. This is something else that I recommend eating every single day is antioxidant rich foods. So primary sources of this, berries and dark leafy greens. And then I've also included on here cocoa because cocoa has a lot of antioxidants. And now I'm not talking about going out and getting a Hershey's bar, but if you get like the baking cocoa powder, for example, or cacao nibs or something like that, where it's just pure cocoa, that is high in antioxidants. So if you use that in your food or in your cooking, rather than going out and buying a chocolate bar that's filled with, dairy and sugar, that is very, very good for you. And then green tea is something else that I drink daily. So every morning I'll have a cup of half-calf coffee because coffee beans actually also have a lot of antioxidants in them. And caffeine is both good and bad for you. It just depends on which thing we're talking about. And it depends on the person and how sensitive they might be to caffeine. It is possible to overdo it. And then in situations like people who are at high risk for Alzheimer's, it seems like the more coffee you drink, the better. And there is no such thing as too much for treating Alzheimer's. So that is one of those things that there's always kind of a great debate on, but it is an antioxidant source as well. And I will do a cup of half-calf coffee followed by a cup of green tea. So vitamins C and E, we know that for vitamin C, citrus and dark leafy greens are great sources of that. Dark leafy greens are also a great source of vitamin E, as are nuts and seeds, and then of course berries for vitamin C as well. Selenium. So the best source of selenium in the diet is Brazil nuts. This is something you want to be careful with though, because it is possible to overdo it and get something called selenium toxicity. So if you are someone who is like a smaller petite person like myself, I would recommend one Brazil nut per day. If you are a man or a taller woman or heavier woman, then I would say do 2 Brazil nuts per day. But definitely don't just like grab a handful and eat them and do that every day because that will not be good. Zinc. So beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, those are great sources of a lot of things, and zinc is definitely one of those things, and it is something that most Americans are short on. So definitely ramp up the amount of beans and legumes, especially that you're eating, but then also nuts and seeds in smaller amounts because those are, also high in fat. So we want to be careful not to completely overdo them, but beans and legumes are going to be your best source, followed by nuts and seeds. And then vitamin D. So of course, vitamin D is sun exposure. But most people are still not getting enough. As a matter of fact, about 95% of Americans are not getting enough vitamin D. And so what I recommend for this, if you are in a place where you're outside a lot, you're in the sun a lot, even if you work outdoors in the sun, you're probably wearing protective clothing, you're wearing sunscreen, helps block the sun. And of course, that's going to inhibit vitamin D production. So what I recommend is that all year round, everyone should take at least 1,000 IU of vitamin D. Now, in the wintertime, if you're in a place like where I am here in the Midwest, where it gets cold and you're really not outside at all, I would bump that up to about 3,000 IU of vitamin D. It is safe to do, it might say that one dose is 1,000. It is safe to do 3,000. You really don't start seeing issues with vitamin D until you hit about 10,000 IUs. And since we are so short on vitamin D, and vitamin D also plays a lot of protective roles in many different diseases, including cancer, in addition to autoimmune disease, it's something that you are better to take a little bit extra of than not have enough. And then vitamin K, which you can get from consuming your brassicas or your cruciferous vegetables, such as broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale. And then another fringe benefit of eating these is that they contain sulforaphane, which is very protective against cancer as well. So I do have a note that I want to mention here too. So you want to balance your omega-6 fatty acids and your omega-3 fatty acids. So for every one source of omega-3, you don't want to have more than 4 omega-6s. And where do you get those omega-6s? Primarily, they come from oil. And so we have a diet in America that is very, very, very oil heavy. Even if you're plant-based or whole food plant-based like myself, it is very easy to have a lot of oil in the diet. One thing that I do not do is I do not cook with oil. So I don't, use it for sauteing. I don't put it in my skillet. If I make baked goods, I will leave the oil out and replace it with applesauce. And the reason I do this, I know there's a lot of debate about oil as well. And in my own personal opinion, As a holistic nutritionist, I do not believe that there is any such thing as a good oil. Yes, there are some oils like avocado oil and olive oil that do have some healthy fats, but they are also very, very high in saturated fat as well. And they are 100% fat. And so they are a tremendous source of omega-6 fatty acids. And again, if you get out of balance, we're not getting enough omega-3, but we are getting too much omega-6. And so you don't want to get out of balance with that, because that can actually lead to disease as well. And then another issue, we are not talking heart health today, but just to touch on the subject for one brief moment, oil also causes damage to our endothelial cell lining inside of our blood vessels and our arteries. So oil also has negative impacts for heart health as well. So for me personally, I highly recommend avoiding oil at all costs. I do not cook with it. I do not use it. The only time that I ever have oil in my diet is about once a week whenever we go out to eat, because it's really just impossible to get away from it whenever you are eating out. So that is my recommendation, is to cut out or eliminate oil as much as you possibly can, and that should help keep you in balance between your omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. All right, and next up we are going to talk about leaky gut. So this is going to bring back the wheat gluten that I had mentioned earlier. So leaky gut is what happens when, over a prolonged period of eating an unhealthy diet, so that is going to be a diet that is heavily rooted in animal products, so meat, dairy, eggs, and processed foods, but very little fiber. So we're not eating very many fruits and vegetables, but we're living on things like fast food, processed food, eating large portions of meat and cheese and things like that. It can, over time, break down the lining of our gut. So there is a very thin membrane that is a protective membrane that lines our gut. And over time of eating a poor quality diet, this membrane will break down. And when that happens, it kind of becomes porous or permeated, and things that should not be able to pass through that lining are then able to pass through. And a prime example of this is wheat gluten. So you really should not have a sensitivity to wheat gluten unless you have celiac disease. But if you do have leaky gut, wheat gluten is a protein. It is a protein of wheat, and it is too big to pass through a healthy gut lining. But if that gut lining has broken down over time and you have developed leaky gut, all of a sudden this gluten is able to pass through that gut lining and start causing reactions in our body. So that's where we see, inflammation, bloating, gas, a lot of discomfort for people who have sensitivities to wheat gluten. And so the key there is not necessarily to cut out wheat gluten or to go gluten-free. Yes, that will be necessary in the short term, but the real goal is to actually heal that gut lining so that that gluten can no longer pass through. And so how do we do that? So things that are going to increase permeability of that gut lining, in other words, break down that gut lining, acetaldehyde. So what is acetaldehyde? This is where alcohol is going to come up again, because acetaldehyde is a carcinogen that is created from drinking alcohol. And the moment you take a sip of alcohol and it crosses your lips and it touches your tongue and begins the digestive process, immediately acetaldehyde starts to be formed and distributed throughout your body. And so when this gets into your gut, that definitely wreaks havoc on your entire gut microbiome, your gut flora, as well as your gut lining. So we want to avoid alcohol as much as possible. And I know that's going to be tough to hear for a lot of Americans, because we do really love our alcohol, but there really is no such thing as a safe amount of alcohol. And I will go ahead and touch on this now really quickly, because I know there's been a lot of misinformation floating around out there on, different studies about alcohol and how much is safe and some is good for you. And so I want to go ahead and dispel some of those myths. So the reason they say that red wine is good for you is because it contains something called resveratrol, which is in the skin of red grapes. So what can you do to get this instead? You can eat grapes, or you can drink 100% pure grape juice. You do not need to consume alcohol along with it in order to get that resveratrol. And the reason that they say one alcoholic beverage per day is better for you than no alcohol at all is because of the way that they did these studies to begin with. And so what they did is they looked at people who were complete abstainers, complete teetotalers, and then they just kind of followed this all the way up to people who are, basically full-blown alcoholics, right? And they did this in order to determine which of these people had the less serious health outcomes over the long term. And what they found was there was a J curve, so a curve that kind of looks like a little fish hook or something. So the people that were at absolute zero teetotalers, it looked like they had worse health outcomes than people who were having just one drink per day. Well, as it turns out, the reason that they got this result is because they were not kind of filtering out those people who were abstainers or teetotalers because of the fact that they already had negative health outcomes and they had to stop drinking. So these might have been people that were lifelong drinkers and all of a sudden are not, and they're putting them into the same category as people who have never drank at all. So when they controlled for this and they removed those people from that study and they re-examined the data, instead of getting the J curve, they got a straight line, a straight diagonal line that started at absolute zero for the people who were absolute teetotalers and climbed proportionally from there with the amount of alcohol that you drink. So conclusively, there is no such thing as a safe amount of alcohol, not even one drink per day. And the more you drink, the worse your health outcomes are going to be. So if you have an autoimmune disease already, if you are at risk for autoimmune disease, definitely strongly recommend abstaining from alcohol. And then another risk factor is inadequate intake of zinc. So again, bump up those beans and legumes and nuts and seeds to get more zinc into your diet. Ethanol is an increaser of gut permeability. And I know you're probably thinking, what on earth? That is fuel, isn't it? And yes, but that fuel comes from corn. What else comes from corn? Corn syrup. So where we're finding ethanol prevalent in our diet is in things like syrups. And I'm not talking like pure maple syrup. I'm talking about things like pancake syrup, which is basically just corn syrup with maple flavoring. We're talking about candies. We're talking about a lot of processed baked goods. So these are sources of ethanol in the diet. And then MCTs, so this is medium chain triglycerides. If you've had a cholesterol panel done, you've heard triglycerides before. And these are in foods that are very, very high in fat. So things like oils, which oils are 100% fat, butter, cheese. So butter is about 80% fat. Cheese, it varies a little bit by different kinds, but the general average is about 70 to 75% fat. So medium chain triglycerides are in those substances, very damaging to your gut lining. So any of those very high fat foods we want to avoid or eliminate from the diet. So how do we decrease gut permeability? So this is a pretty short and sweet list. We've already talked about antioxidant-rich foods, and so we definitely want to bump up our intake of those, but also fiber, 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 fiber. We want foods that are high in fiber, so we want to get rid of those animal products that are damaging to that gut lining, and we want to replace them with high fiber foods because fiber is what feeds our gut flora, that feeds our gut microbiome, all of the bacteria and viruses and funguses and everything that live in our gut. We have 100 trillion microorganisms living in our gut. That is more than the number of cells that we have in our entire body. That is more than the number of stars in our solar system. It is an extreme number, and we have that all in our gut microbiome. And so we want to have the balance tipped in favor of those good bacteria. And in order to do that, we need fiber because that is what the good gut bacteria feed on, is the fiber. So fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, we want a diet that is high in all of these. And that is going to help improve our leaky gut and eventually heal and eliminate that leaky gut. Now, I will point out that if you are someone who has been eating the standard American diet, which is heavy on animal products, heavy on processed foods, fast food, not eating very much fiber, if you try to make a sudden jump and just cut all of that stuff out and immediately eat nothing but fruits and vegetables and beans all the time, you are probably going to live to regret it because your gut microbiome is not ready to handle that kind of an influx of fiber. So if you've been eating that kind of a diet, the bad bacteria are probably very, very well and healthy in your gut and they have taken over. So you are missing a lot of what you need to be able to process and break down those high fiber foods. And so if that is the case, then we need to slowly build that back up over time in order to be able to consume and process those high fiber foods. So if you notice that you start adding fiber to your diet and you're having a lot of gas, a lot of bloating, a lot of diarrhea, that is almost guaranteed to be what the issue is. So we need to start doing kind of a slow introduction of those foods and allow yourself time to adjust. And it can absolutely take weeks, maybe even months, depending on how far out of balance your gut microflora might be. So the gut microbiome, I just went over a little bit of this before switching, so maybe I'll have that slide up already. But I want to talk about what are some of the other things that these different microbiota in our gut do. What are their jobs? So they help keep out pathogens. So if you're exposed to sickness like viruses, bacteria, so like infections, for example, anything like that, they help to eliminate those to keep you from getting sick. So they help keep you well, which is a function, obviously, of the immune system. So here's where we start seeing that connection between our gut microbiome and our immune system, because believe it or not, they are a very important part of that immune system. And this is one of the reasons, because they help reduce pathogens. They also help eliminate and excrete toxins from our body as well. They maintain a cytokine balance. And so what does that mean? A cytokine storm is kind of an acute inflammatory reaction in response to an invader. So that can be stress, or that can be, again, a virus, a bacteria, infection, something that's happening within your body. We can have a very strong cytokine storm that reacts to that. And so when you have a healthy gut microbiome, it helps maintain the balance of that reaction so it doesn't just completely go overboard and make you feel miserable. It can help regulate mood. How does it do this? So if you've ever heard of serotonin, this is what we refer to as the happy hormone. And 90 to 95% of serotonin is actually made in your gut. And it needs all of these healthy gut bacteria and microorganisms to be able to do that. It requires a high fiber diet to be able to do that. And so this is kind of the antidote to cortisol. So when we're experiencing a lot of stress, which is something else I'm going to get to here in just a moment. So stress, cortisol is the stress hormone, and it is generated from your pituitary gland or from your kidneys. And so the kind of counterbalance to that is the serotonin, which helps bring those cortisol levels back under control. And that serotonin, again, is generated from the gut. So that is how it regulates mood. And then again, regulating immune system function is a very important role of your gut microbiome. So again, a high fiber, predominantly plant-based diet is the best thing you can do for optimal gut health. And then on the opposite of that, a diet that is high in animal products, saturated fats, trans fats, processed foods, fast food is going to be detrimental to gut health and also to your immune system. So now we're going to touch on stress. So if inflammation is kind of the one head of this monster, stress is the second. And, especially with just American lifestyles, most of us carry a lot of stress. And that could be, stress from work. It could be stress from family, from, raising kids, what have you. We have a lot of situations in our lives where we carry a lot of stress with us. And the trouble with that is, we have a stress response inside of our body. That's where this fight or flight reaction comes from. And that was intended to be used in acute situations. So, there's a predator after us, we have to run away kind of a situation. It's something that is short and we're over it and then back to normal. But we're now in a position where we're encountering stressors that are unnecessarily triggering like kind of that fight or flight response. And we constantly feel anxious. We constantly feel just overwhelmed. And this is a part of just how we live everyday life. And it's part of American culture now. And it can be very difficult to escape because, if that stress is coming from work, it's not realistic for most of us to be able to just quit our jobs and get a different one. Say you're a single mom like myself, you can't just get rid of your kids. I mean, so, those stressors are there. But we have to find a way to manage it, because if we don't, having that constant stress and those high levels of cortisol all the time are detrimental to gut health, and they wreak havoc on the immune system. And over time, that can cause your immune system to break down and allow those autoimmune conditions to develop. Because what is an autoimmune disease? Essentially, an autoimmune disease is just a collapse of your immune system where it kind of just breaks and forgets what it's doing, and it starts attacking your own body. So that is essentially what an autoimmune disease does. So, an unhealthy gut microbiome can also lead to neuropsychotic conditions, and the two most prevalent of these are actually depression and anxiety. And so, a little fun fact about depression, again, I was just talking about how the majority of serotonin is made in our gut. So, there have been many instances of depression that have actually been cured not by medicating, not by therapy, but simply by changing diet and lifestyle, switching to a healthy, nutrient dense diet, and adding exercise can completely eliminate depression for many people. And the reason is because that depression is not a chemical imbalance, but it is coming from an imbalance within the gut. It is coming from too much stress. It is coming from a poor diet. And these things combined are wreaking havoc on your gut. They're depleting serotonin production. If you're not producing that happy hormone, it is very difficult to be happy. So many instances of depression actually come from exactly this. And anxiety is kind of the same ordeal. We're carrying a lot of stress around, and being constantly chronically stressed leads to anxiety. So if we are able to bring that stress back under control, if we are able to start producing more serotonin in our gut, it helps alleviate that anxiety as well. All right, and so the final thing I want to talk about before wrapping this up are the 5 R's of functional medicine. And now the previous stuff that I've already discussed, we did talk about them in the course that I just wrapped up for my nutrition certification renewal, but they are things that I've already known for a very, very long time. But this is new to me because this comes from functional medicine. And so these 5 R's are a way to help restore our gut microbiome. And so they are remove, replace, reinoculate, repair, and relax. And so the first of those is remove. And this focuses on essentially removing things that are in our gut that we don't want to be there. And the focus is pathogens, which again, virus, fungus, bacteria that are non-beneficial, that are actually damaging rather than helpful. So it talked about ways that you can do this. So obviously dietary change, we've just been talking about this. So switching to a high fiber diet is definitely going to help that. If you are someone who has a very out of balance gut microbiome and you need additional help, it did mention some things you can try, such as thyme, oregano, lemon balm, tea tree, coriander, and mint extracts or oils. And then you could also do pharmaceutical intervention if it is necessary to help eliminate those. So these are things like, maybe antibiotics for infection. Sometimes that is necessary. I like to avoid this unless it is absolutely necessary, because the problem with something like taking antibiotics is antibiotics do not care what bacteria they are eliminating. They will eliminate the good right along with the bad. So if you have a healthy gut microbiome and you take antibiotics, it gets rid of the infection in the short term, but it depletes your gut health in the long term, and it can take a few weeks to build it back up. So I would recommend talking to either a functional medicine doctor or a lifestyle medicine doctor about this. If you want to go to a gastroenterologist, because gut health and gastroenterologist, that is fine, but I would definitely do my due diligence and conduct interviews if necessary to find out which gastroenterologist in your area is actually willing to work with a diet and lifestyle change and not just treat the issues with medication. So replace. Once we have gotten rid of those unwanted pests that are in our microbiome, we want to replace them with things that are good for us. So for me personally, I say that's where you start eating your healthy, high fiber, whole food, plant-based diet. However, again, if you are in a position where you have to introduce fiber slowly because your gut is so damaged that it needs time to build up tolerance for that much extra fiber, you may need digestive support. So you can try things like ginger and turmeric and certain herbs, but also, again, you may need some medical intervention. So again, talk to a functional medicine or lifestyle medicine doctor, and they may be able to help you with that. Reinoculate. Now, this is the part that is kind of my forte. So this is where we start introducing the fiber. We've healed the situation that, we had all of these bad bacteria and things in there that we needed to get out. We have kind of replaced them with some things that we need to be able to build up our ability to process fiber. Now we're ready to start bringing that fiber in and really focus on that good, healthy diet. So Fiber as a prebiotic. Something that we hear a lot about is probiotics. And I do think that, kind of trend about probiotics has died down a little bit. I don't hear nearly as much about it as I used to. But I want to talk about those probiotic supplements because we have literally millions, if not trillions, of different probiotics in our microbiome. And when you take a supplement, it is pulling out just one or two, or at most, maybe a handful of probiotics. Think about that, a handful. So up to five, usually just one or two, out of absolute millions, billions even, if not trillions. They estimate, like I said before, 100 trillion different microorganisms. How much of that is, probiotic bacteria? So you cannot get there with a supplement. In order to get there, you have to have the right diet. And so what you need is to eat plenty of fiber, because fiber is a prebiotic that feeds those probiotics and allows them to thrive in the gut. So remember, fiber equals prebiotic. Prebiotic feeds probiotic. So where you want to start is not with taking probiotic supplements or even prebiotic supplements. You want to start with a high fiber diet. You want to get as much fiber as possible. They being, FDA, USDA, whoever the powers that be, say that we should get at least 25 grams of fiber in our diet daily, but I say double that. You actually want to get as close to 50 as possible. Now, our, early humans were on a plant-based diet. They were eating, berries, leaves, tubers, things like that. That was their primary diet back in the beginning of time. And they have estimated that the fiber intake for the earliest humans was anywhere from 100 to 150 grams daily. So for us to say that 50 is a push, just think about that compared to what the earliest humans were getting. So I say 50 grams per day should be the goal. And then another benefit of intaking all of this fiber are short chain fatty acids. So short chain fatty acids, what do? First and foremost, they help reduce inflammation. So remember, back to inflammation, we already talked about the implications of prolonged inflammation on our immune system and its link to autoimmune disease. So those short chain fatty acids help bring that down. In addition to, helping with inflammation, it also helps us to metabolize fats. It helps boost our anti-cancer activity. It helps regulate blood pressure. It helps in treating obesity. It helps in cognitive functioning. So short chain fatty acids are something that we want a lot of, and we get them again from eating fiber. So I recommend, and actually I don't recommend this. This comes from Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, whose book I will link below. It is called Fiber Fueled, and it is a fantastic resource on gut health. But he recommends eating a variety of plants, at least 30 different plants per day. And I know that sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. So let me explain. Let's say I'm going to eat a salad with my lunch. So that salad is going to have maybe some romaine lettuce, maybe some spinach, maybe some arugula. I'm going to add broccoli for a good cruciferous vegetable. I'm going to add some red onions. Let's say we'll throw on some grated carrot. We'll add some hemp seeds, maybe put on some olives. So right there, we are already at 8 plants in one salad. So it really, if you think about it in those terms, it is not difficult to get to 30 per day. Because remember, it's not about eating like an entire serving of one of these things. It's just simply about the variety, because each different plant has a different type of fiber, and each different type of fiber feeds a different type of microorganism in your gut. So we need as many and as much of a diverse diet as we possibly can. Repair. So this kind of introduces some other items besides just fiber. So we need to have healthy fats, proteins, zinc, and vitamin E as well. Healthy fats, what does that look like? Nuts, seeds, and avocados. We need them, but we need to not take them to excess, because too much fat can cause issues as well. Now, when it comes to macronutrients, so we have fats, we have proteins, we have carbohydrates. Those are the 3 macros. And there's all kinds of conflicting information out there about what that balance should be, how much of each one you should have. Should it be, a 60-20-20? Should it be an 80-10-10? So a lot of debate about that. But here is the thing. Every single person is going to need something different there because we all metabolize differently. We all have very, very different body types. We all have different ways of functioning and processing food. So, what works for one person may not work for the next person. And so, for myself personally, just to give like a little bit of a personal anecdote, I have learned that fats are something I am very sensitive to, and I have to keep them very, very minimal. How do I know this? So, I had mentioned earlier about fats and estrogen. So, if you have a diet high in fat, um, estrogen production will spike and you will have very likely more estrogen. Now, again, this varies person to person. Some people will produce more than others, but I am a person that it does not take very much fat for my estrogen levels in my body to spike. And so I'm also a person that I like a lot of diversity in my food, but for whatever reason, breakfast is one of those things where I pick something and I get on that thing and I stay there for a while. Like right now, I'm eating pancakes for breakfast every single day. So I crush up a vegan calcium supplement because I am 38, almost 39 years old. So menopausal age. And then I always do ground flax in it. I do whole wheat flour and then applesauce instead of oil and then almond milk. And I mix all of that up and I throw it in a pan and I fry it up. And then I add on top some berries mixed with chia seeds to make kind of like it's sort of a syrup because chia seeds gel so they get thick. And then I add some maple syrup to sweeten. So that's what I've been eating for breakfast for like 2 months straight. Well, for a while, I was on an avocado toast kick. And so I was eating like a half an avocado on a couple of slices of sourdough toast every morning for breakfast. And this is in addition to my flaxseed, my chia seed, hemp seed, walnuts, cashews, because I like cashew cheese sauce. And something I noticed was that I was starting, especially when I was getting close to my period, I was starting to have nausea. I was having breast tenderness. It basically was like early pregnancy symptoms. It is not possible for me to be pregnant because my boyfriend has had a vasectomy, so not happening. But that's what it felt like. And then when I did start my period, I was having menstrual cramps, and I have not had menstrual cramps since I went plant based I officially went fully plant based about 4 years ago. Um, well, let me throw in a little asterisk there with that. When I say fully plant based, I mean I'm about 95% plant based. I'll have about a serving or so of meat a week, and that is primarily just to make it a little easier when we go out to eat. Now, at home, I do not eat meat at all whatsoever. I am fully plant based when I cook at home, which is the vast majority of the time, except for about once per week. So, anyway, back on track. So whenever I first started having these symptoms, I thought, okay, there might be something going on with my thyroid. I do have like a nodule on my thyroid right here, which is something that is definitely hereditary. My grandma always had them. It's been there for years. It hasn't changed, hasn't moved, hasn't done anything. But I was like, man, I better get this checked out just in case. So I went and had my thyroid checked. Everything was fine. And just knowing what I already know about nutrition, I thought, I'm eating avocados a lot. That's a lot of fat. Fat and estrogen kind of go hand in hand. So I wonder if it's not that. And so I cut the avocados completely out of my diet. I quit eating them. I cut all the way back on the fat to where I was just doing chia seeds and flax seeds for a while. By the time I started my next period, every single one of the symptoms was completely gone. And so this is what I mean by every single person has different requirements for fats, proteins, and carbohydrates because we all process things differently. And I am also a person that I will not gain an ounce of fat anywhere on my body except for around my midsection. And around my midsection, I actually gain it very, very easily. So during this time, I was also seeing some, kind of pudginess around my midsection as well. So I don't know if that has something to do with it, but that is just my body makeup. That's the way that it is. And so I have to be very careful with fats, and I keep my fats to about 10% or less for that reason. So moving on to protein. So you want to focus on getting protein from beans and legumes primarily. So beans, peas, lentils, things of that nature. Nuts and seeds are a good source of protein as well, but they are more of a source of fat than anything else. So I kind of keep those in the fats column. Zinc, again, with the beans and legumes and the nuts and seeds. You definitely need those in your diet for zinc, but I would recommend focusing more on the beans and legumes than on the nuts and seeds because no matter how sensitive or unsensitive you are to fat, you still can overdo the fat pretty quickly because those nuts and seeds are, fat heavy and also very calorically dense, especially the nuts like peanuts more than anything. And then vitamin E. So again, with the nuts and seeds, avocados, some vegetables and fruits, like I believe mangoes is one that's good, and then like dark leafy greens. So last but not least, we are on to relax. And this one is going to touch specifically on stress. So we want to do whatever we can do to reduce stress. Again, it is not always feasible to eliminate the stressor from our life. If you can, please do. That might be as simple as something like you have, a friend or an extended family member or something that is just constantly drama and constantly causing you issues. And so, you may need to cut a person like that out of your life to eliminate stress. So, I mean, there are certain situations where it is possible to eliminate the stressor, but it isn't always. And so for that reason, we have to learn how to manage it in a way that keeps our cortisol levels in check. And so some ways to do that: mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. And I'm sure that you've heard these many, many times. Practicing mindfulness is something that I do like to do. I practice yoga daily. For me personally, meditation is kind of the one where I'm like, all right, I can't do this. I have tried it so many times, and I kind of enjoy it when I do it, but I cannot stick to a routine with it because I am a person that is just constantly kind of on the go. And so my brain is constantly on the go. And being able to just sit and relax and shut my brain off in order to meditate for even 10 minutes is such a struggle. So I've just not been successful with it. Like, we all have our challenges and our things that just for whatever reason we cannot manage to accomplish. And for me, meditation is one of those things. But if you are able to do it, it is very, very beneficial for helping to reduce and eliminate your stress. So those are the things that I wanted to go over with you today. Again, to recap, we're looking at primarily inflammation and stress, the two things that we want to get into check the most because they both lead to a breaking down of the immune system, and that breaking down of the immune system can lead to autoimmune disease. And if you already have autoimmune disease and we're talking about managing those symptoms and help bringing things back down into balance, when we focus on gut health, we are focusing on eliminating that inflammation. We are focusing on eliminating that stress, and it is going to bring all of those autoimmune symptoms back into check as well. So the best way to do that is with a very nutrient dense, high fiber, whole food, plant-based diet. So with all of that said, if you are interested in a plant-based lifestyle, my normal video format is a vlog. I do 2 weekly vlogs. So I do a weekday and a weekend. On my weekday vlogs, I always do some sort of a plant-based cooking. I do meal planning, so you will get some plant-based content in with there. I do nutrition chats in those videos from time to time. When the subject comes up or when the time is right and I have something to share, I'll do nutrition chats. And then weekend vlogs are kind of just a mixture of whatever I'm up to. Right now it is garden season. I do have a garden, and so I'm spending a lot of time out there. So if you are interested in any of those things, please feel free to follow along, hit that subscribe button. I will be back here. Let's see, today is Wednesday. So Friday, I will have my weekend vlog will be out. So I will catch back up with you then if you care to stick around. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions for me about anything that I've talked about, please feel free to leave them below and I will do my best to get you an answer. Bye.